Denver football after dark on this Monday night. A little bit different than what I was expecting to talk about when I woke up this morning. But Sean Payton tossed something out there at the end of his press conference. And it wasn't really what he was asked about, because he was asked about a comment that he made to Charles Robinson of Yahoo Sports, where he basically dropped the line that he thinks the Broncos are a team capable of winning the Super Bowl, and that he set that expectation internally. But he dropped something in there at the end where he might have just eliminated some teams from Super Bowl contention, at least in his mind. And so it got some of us media types talking, and it got me thinking the rest of the day. And I'm still thinking about it, and this being the test kitchen, that's why I'm going to do it here. If Sean Payton says 20 teams are dysfunctional at the top, and thus you can basically count them out, as it were, for winning a championship, who are they? And do they include some teams that basically we consider contenders? So we're going to dive into that here at Denver Football After Dark, and we'll probably talk some Broncos camp as well, but we're going to start there. And you see right there Sean Payton pictured with Greg Penner, the Broncos' controlling owner, who certainly in his estimation, and I think the estimation of most of y'all who are going to watch the show, and my estimation as well, is a big reason why the Broncos are in pretty daggum good shape here. Howdy. Good to see you. By the way, I know some have suggested getting a neon light or something. It would be cool to have a neon light. I do need to work on the backlighting at some point. So that's a long-term thing, I suppose. I tried to bring a desk light over and didn't really work. So I did some experimenting tonight, didn't really work. But it might look different a couple of nights from now, because I'll be doing this from a hotel in Santa Clara, California, in advance of the joint practices on Thursday, because I will be out there watching that practice, and I will be covering the preseason opener out there against the 49ers. Basically, wherever the Broncos go, I go. So pleased to have you with me here on this Monday night. Pleased to see you here. And there's Rock Chalk finally catching this live. Hey, good to see you, Rock Chalk. Albert here from Chiefs Boredom area. Oh, goodness gracious. So you'd start by saying the Kansas City Chiefs are not among those 20 teams that Sean Payton would rule out, considering they've won quite a few championships in recent years, even though there's that NFLPA survey that docks the Chiefs annually in terms of some of their facilities and ownership and so forth. Certainly the Chiefs seem to be doing some things right. Certainly Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid probably have a lot to do with it, but it seems like they're doing okay. They would not be among those 20. But who are those 20? Well, first of all, let's play the clip here of Sean Payton kind of going into the things that you need to have to be a championship team. And well, actually, first we'll start here. We'll start with the quote. This is at the end of the piece at Yahoo Sports from Charles Robinson. And he says, Sean Payton says, quote, "The short-term goal is winning the division, but this is a team capable of winning the Super Bowl," saying of the 2025 Broncos. "I've coached 6 teams that I thought could win the Super Bowl. Some went to championship games, some to the playoffs. This is my 7th team that I think has that." So he's basically laying down the gauntlet. Now, he has said Super Bowl to his team. He said that. If you watch on the Denver Sports YouTube channel, my conversation with Pat Bryant, and I encourage you to do so, to watch the whole thing. I've put some written excerpts from it in my recap of the day at denversports.com. And I'll continue to put some more things in stories because there's a few angles that I want to write about. But Pat Bryant even talks about how in the locker room and what the coaches are talking about, they are thinking Super Bowl. This is the mindset. They are not hiding from those two words. They're focused on the moment and the task of each day, but certainly the expectation is Super Bowl. This is what's on their mind. That he has established that as a realistic goal, and certainly he's putting it out there publicly that he believes this team has that capability. But one of the reasons why he believes that is it goes beyond what is in the locker room and what has been done personnel-wise. That it goes to the top of the organization, to the guy pictured in the opening slide there that Sean Payton is talking with. That, of course, is Greg Penner. And he'll tell you that's part of the reason why he was encouraged by the possibility of this job back in 2023, even though, of course, he wasn't necessarily the Broncos' first choice. Of course, there's the whole thing of it doesn't matter if you're the first choice, just that you are the final choice, right? But we know that they went through some possibilities, that they talked to other candidates, that they were interested, for example, in Jim Harbaugh, that they were interested in DeMeco Ryans, and they, went down a pretty extensive list, and then ultimately it was Sean Payton. Jim Harbaugh did not want to go to the NFL at that time, and then a year later, Michigan was national champions, job complete for Jim Harbaugh, and he comes back to the NFL with the Los Angeles Chargers. But it's interesting to talk about the Chargers in light of what Sean Payton says at the end of his press conference on Monday, and what I lobbed there in the title of this show, with Sean Payton referring to 20 teams as dysfunctional at the top, and who are they? So here's Sean Payton talking about the things that basically a championship level team needs at the end of his press conference on Monday.
Well, obviously, it has to start with quarterback. It has to start with defense. It has to start with offensive line. Like there's certain things that if they're not on point, it's hard to make a statement like that. But when you look at some of these critical factors, and look, I told them that, and now that just means you have a chance, and then I would say most importantly, ownership. Because there's 20 that each year have hope and dreams, and they're dysfunctional at the top.
20 that you can base their dysfunctional, that without saying the words, it's almost like you can say, okay, they have the hopes and dreams, but it's not going to happen. The funny thing is, I just mentioned the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh, and what is something that the Chargers under Spanos family ownership do not have? They don't have a championship. The family has owned the team for over 40 years, going back to the mid-1980s when Alex Spanos bought the team from Gene Klein. They didn't win it all under Gene Klein. They had some great teams, of course, didn't get it done. And in fact, I don't know if you've ever seen the America's Game Missing Rings series that was out about 16, 17 years ago, and it chronicles the 1981 Chargers and how there were contract disputes early in that 1981 season, and the disputes led to Fred Dean, eventual Hall of Fame defensive lineman, getting traded to San Francisco, who, not coincidentally, won the Super Bowl that year, and John Jefferson, wide receiver, getting traded to the Green Bay Packers. They did manage to trade for Wes Chandler from New Orleans, who was a terrific receiver in and of himself, but you could say, okay, there's an example of an organization that, there's a reason why they haven't gone all the way, both with that ownership and then now with Spanos family ownership. So you would say, for example, that the Chargers probably one of those 20. Even though you look and say, okay, they've got the offensive line, they've got the quarterback, defense probably, and certainly they have a coach who's very good in Jim Harbaugh. I think that's objectively true. He's never had a losing season as an NFL head coach. I mean, he may drive everyone crazy, but he is objectively a very good head coach. But the question would be ownership. So you'd say one. Raiders dysfunctional. Yeah, that's, you know what, Dennis, that's another one. And Pete Carroll is another objectively very good head coach who will bring order to that organization. And changes they've made in the front office on the football side, they will bring order to the Raiders. And I've said on Orange and Blue today, the Raiders will probably be the best fourth place team in the NFL. I'm picking the Raiders to go 9-8 this year. They look like a team that finishes right there in that 8-9, 9-8 mix. And I think if you put the Raiders, this Raiders team, if you plopped them over in, say, the NFC South, they'd win 10 games. The unfortunate thing for the Raiders is they are in a high-rent district, a high-rent neighborhood. They basically they've got a nice house in Highlands Ranch, but their neighborhood is Cherry Hills Village. And so it's a pretty good house, but they're in, they are in the fanciest neighborhood in the state, so to speak. But with that ownership, are they ever going to get over the top? Because we're a long way from the last Raiders World Championship. It was 1983. And a long way from being able to say that they are properly run at the top, that they were functional. I mean, I think probably the last time you could say the Raiders were functional at the top, I don't know, back the first time Art Shell was coaching the team around 1990 or so. It's been a long, long time. Are the Steelers dysfunctional? Okay, David. Okay. And this is a great conversation to have, because have some teams that were functional become dysfunctional? I would say the Steelers probably are still functional. If anything, maybe they are too patient. If they err on any side, they're probably maybe a little too patient. But if you're going to err in one direction, I'd say probably that is where you want to go. But a team that maybe has slipped toward dysfunction at the top that used to be a gold standard would be the New York Giants. You go back 20 years ago, the final years of Wellington Mara before he died, and of course then his son John Mara took over his part of the franchise. It used to be the Mara family, and then the Maras sold part of the franchise to the Tisch family, and so it's been the Maras and the Tisches. And that was probably regarded as a gold standard franchise really up until about the last decade or so. But things have changed, and it's a club where you can say it's maybe lost its way a little bit. It's become a team that's another club that used to be very patient, and now has become the kind of place where they're firing coaches after a couple of years. They're quickly moving on. It's changed a little bit. And David, yeah, I think that's an example of how things can evolve. And certainly the Raiders went from being functional to dysfunctional. So it's not like it hasn't happened before. And the same thing may be happening with the Giants. Monty, yes, the Cowboys are definitely dysfunctional. And the question may be, like, were they ever functional? Like, I think that there was a time when they were, and I think they probably covered it up pretty well, even though Jerry Jones has always been Mr. Showmanship, to put it kindly. But they were on the cutting edge of things in terms of revenue generation, for example, in the 1990s. But then I think sometimes they got to a point where I think they thought their farts didn't stink. And that's when dysfunction sort of came in. Albert and Michelle, Jets are probably numero uno. Yes. So I think it's interesting now. We're starting to get things adding up, because we're saying the Cowboys, we're saying the Chargers, and we're saying the Raiders, and the Giants, and the Jets. It's actually, now it's starting to see, okay, how did we get to 20? How did Sean Payton get to 20? Now, some of these we've named, Giants, Jets, it's obvious they're not contenders. But the Cowboys, I mean, they had a bad year last year, but they are they're semi-regular in the playoffs. The Chargers are a team that we talk about saying, okay, they've got the quarterback, they've got the coach, they're in the conversation. But by the Sean Payton standard, they would be one of the 20 that you rule out. The Bengals would probably be one of the 20 you rule out. Because certainly when you see this situation with Trey Hendrickson, does that stand as evidence of a functional organization? I know there was a comment earlier, and I'm going to just kind of scroll back through it here because I want to, there it is from Dennis. The Ohio teams are dysfunctional. The Browns are obviously a fountain of dysfunction, complete from the top down. And the Bengals seem to have a decent amount of on-field success for the last 20 years in spite of what they have at the top. Now, those of you who were football fans in the 1990s, I'm sure remember the Cincinnati Bengals era. But for most of the last 2 decades, they've actually been a pretty competent team. The Carson Palmer years, the Andy Dalton years, and now the Joe Burrow years. They've had 3 decent to good to excellent quarterbacks. Carson Palmer was good to very good, although he never quite was what he was going to be before the ACL injury. Andy Dalton had them in the playoffs 5 years in a row. They've always seemed to have a terrific wide receiver one most of those years. And but there's been a ceiling on them. And I think the Bengals would probably stand as kind of the best example of how if you don't have it right at the top, maybe you're not going to be able to get all the way there. That you can come close. And certainly in the Bengals' history, they have gone to the Super Bowl 3 times. And all 3 times they've lost by 5 points or fewer. So, like, there is actually they may be the shining example of a team that shows you can get almost all the way to the top and you can have everything else. And in those 3 instances, they had the Super Bowl. They had Joe Burrow, who is objectively a great quarterback. They had Boomer Esiason, who in 1988 was the NFL MVP when they lost the 49ers and Joe Montana in Super Bowl 23. And when they lost Super Bowl 16 by 5 points, they had Ken Anderson, who had an MVP caliber year that year. He may have been MVP. I'm blanking on who was the 81 MVP. But Ken Anderson is a borderline Hall of Famer. So there's a team that they've been owned by the Brown family the entire time. Paul Brown and then Mike Brown from 1991 on. And they've always been run frugally. I'm going to be nice and use the word frugally. And that might be, they might be the shining example of what Sean Payton is talking about. Because those teams, like, most of them have decent defenses and they've had good O-lines. I mean, shoot, those 80s teams had Anthony frickin' Munoz, arguably the greatest tackle to ever play in the sport. And they've had, in those years, excellent quarterbacks. They had the things that Sean Payton is talking about, except truly functional ownership. And they came close and they didn't get over the top. It's like that. There's that ceiling. Man, that's exactly what he's talking about. And so we can maybe sit here today and say, for all the Bengals have, are they destined to eternally fall short? And man, like, I love watching Joe Burrow. Okay, let's all take our fandom. Like, I know y'all are Broncos fans watching this. Taking any fandom loyalty out of it, I'll say this: as a football observer, I thoroughly enjoy watching Joe Burrow and enjoy watching that Bengal offense. I love watching them work. I love watching him throw to T and Jamar Chase. That is a fun team to tune in. Like, they would be, even like when they have a year like last year when they can't seem to stop anybody, they would be like what you'd call in basketball the NBA, the league pass team. Like, okay, they're not my team, but I'm going to make a point of watching them because they're tremendously fun to watch. Like, Burrow he's preternatural almost in the way he sees the field, the way he sees things, but almost like a step before they happen. But because of where he is, the organization he's in, is he destined to not ever get over the top? Man. So, they're so talented offensively. Yeah, Brian, you're right. I mean, they are so, like, fragile and could implode. They kind of imploded last year for a while. And then in December, they just put it together. And the Broncos kind of caught them at the worst possible time. Although, boy, was that game in December, if you, again, take your emotion out of it, if you were a neutral observer watching that game, it was fun. It was a great Saturday game to watch. And, you got, And the defenses were struggling mightily, but boy, just kind of in the fourth quarter when Bo's throwing to Marvin down the field and it's just going back and forth. It was just like, I mean, it was like a seismograph during a major earthquake, just up and down, up and down. It's exciting football. Yeah. Munoz was incredible. Yeah, I mean, the Bengals have had some awesome players. And they, like, you look at those teams, like, they had the elements of championship teams. And yet, always just short. And, like, that's the thing, not getting blown out in the Super Bowl. Like, they're close. I mean, the Super Bowl 16 that they lost, the first one they lost, like, they were on the wrong end of a goal line stand that you could say was the difference in the game. So we'll take a dysfunctional Bengals team. Yeah, you know what? Okay, like you look at what things end up being the difference. Now, okay, let's talk about like function. I'll give you another one. Now, maybe you could say maybe a slightly dysfunctional situation did win a Super Bowl, and that was the Colts in 06 with Peyton Manning and Jim Irsay. Now, that's an interesting discussion because, like Jim Irsay, the late Jim Irsay, we know he dealt with addiction and things like that. We know he struggled with some things during his life. So that was probably a situation where at times it was functional and at times it wasn't, just sort of depending on where Jim was. So you may have had a moment where it was functional and it was great, and then you had a moment where maybe it wasn't as functional. And so you could say probably that was in a function, maybe you had a functional window, right? So, and that's another thing, function and dysfunction, it, like we talked about with some teams, it's not always, oh, they're permanently functional or permanently dysfunctional. That's another thing to consider as well. So it's not always it's not always a thing. Are the Patriots dysfunctional without Brady? See, and this is another thing, and I think you can be a bad team and have good ownership if you don't have the other elements. And I think I'll actually give you an example here. Even though this ownership group is reviled on the other side of the pond, they have done an excellent job here on this side of the ocean. And I'm talking about the Glazer family with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They bought a mess in 1995 when they bought the Bucs from the trust of Hugh Culverhouse. Hugh Culverhouse was incredibly cheap, and basically he would borrow from the Bucs, like he would use the Bucs as collateral to finance like his other real estate and other things, and it was a mess there. They have had bad years. In fact, they had a run from 2008 to 2019 when they missed the playoffs. And why did they miss the playoffs? Well, they missed on a couple of coaching hires, and they missed on quarterbacks. They missed on Josh Freeman, and they missed on Jameis Winston. And so, okay, that's where Sean Payton has talked about. Okay, you have to have the quarterback, you have to have the defense, you have to have the offensive line. We know right there, the Bucs had 2 first-round swings at quarterback, and they missed. It doesn't mean they had bad ownership, but they didn't have the other things. You have to have all that. But when they had all the pieces, when the pieces did come together, because you had that structure at the top that was able to have the wherewithal to say, okay, we have a chance to get Tom Brady. We have we can go get some other pieces. Let's do it. Let's make this happen. See, that's the thing the Broncos can do, that we can get these other pieces. Let's make that happen. Let's do it right now. Let's take advantage of this window we're in. That's why they can say, okay, hey, we can get Cortland Sutton re-signed. We can we can get Zach Allen done after we got Pat Surtain done and Quinn Miners done and Garrett Bowles re-signed and Jonathan Cooper re-signed. Like, they have the wherewithal to do that. I mean, there's no Trey Hendrickson situation happening here. Everybody's around. Nothing like that is coming to pass here. So that's the thing. It's not that the Broncos, look, there will come a time at some point with the Walton Penner ownership group. There will come a time where there's a bad season. We've already seen one, right? First year on the job when they were getting settled in, 5-12. There will come a point with the Walton Penner ownership group when they have a bad year or bad years. But the thing that is eventually they'll find their way out of it. And then when the window opens up to have a chance, that they will maximize it. So that's the thing. That is what it means to have functional ownership. Tampa Bay, when they had the chance, when the pieces were in place, they were able to bring it together to add more to it, to say, what what more do we need around Tom? And they got it done. So I would say, for example, when the example of the Patriots came up, they have that's functional ownership, and I think we're going to find out here in the next 2 to 3 years if Drake May develops as a quarterback. Now that you have a good coach in there in Mike Vrabel, if May develops, if he proves to be the guy, and they can build up the O-line, because that's another thing. Their O-line was a mess, and Sean Payton did say offensive line. And the Patriots had a sieve last year. And that was one thing the Patriots really did wrong in their building process, was they did not get the line right before they got the quarterback. What Sean Payton did right was he got the line fortified before he drafted the quarterback. That's my stupid old school thing, is that before you get a young quarterback, you build the line to give him a shot. And also so you can get a better evaluation of him. Like, I learned that when I was 11, 12 years old, watching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers try to develop Vinny Testaverde. And they didn't have the line before. They tried to develop the line after, because the year after they drafted Vinny, they drafted Paul Gruber at left tackle. And he was terrific, but he was one guy. And that was it. Paul Gruber, but last I heard, I think he's living up, actually Colorado guy now. He's living in Edwards, I believe. So anyway, but that's like my old school. I'm totally like old school. Like Jeff Legwold and I would probably say the same thing. You build the line before you get the quarterback in there. That's otherwise, like, what are you doing? So that's where the Patriots completely screwed that up. Is that they trying to, let's get the quarterback. Like, yeah, and I get it. It was a quarterback friendly year, but you should have at least, couldn't you go sign some guy? Couldn't you find some better guys than the ones you had last year? I mean, crud. But Sean Payton, exactly. In 2023, his first 2 signings were Ben Powers and Mike McGlinchey on offense, and then Zach Allen on defense. It was the big 3 pickups were trenches guys. I mean, that's how you do it. That's where you start. Start with the guys on the inside. And then, of course, he inherited Quinn Miners, and then he and Zach Strief inherited Garrett Bowles, and Strief figured out how to coach Garrett Bowles, which was, as it turned out, the same way as Mike Munchak coached Garrett Bowles. But the best thing I can say about Zach Strief is he is a lot like Mike Munchak in how he coaches. Like, there's, He is terrific at coaching technique, and he has the right mind. He has the right mentality. Like, Munch is not a screamer, and Streif is not a screamer. Like, that's the thing. You hear when you watch him coach, like, you don't hear Streif raising his voice very much. I mean, he can be forceful with them, but you don't. That's not an area of the field where you hear you don't hear tirades over there. You hear some occasional curses, but you hear instruction. And that's why Garrett Bowles responds so well. He responds well to love, support, and instruction. He didn't respond well to Butch Berry, but he responded wonderfully to Mike Munchak. He responds wonderfully to Zach Streif, and that's why he played the best ball of his career for Munch and now for Streif. So, and that's part of coaching too, is like knowing what works for your player and teaching in the manner that gets the most out of the guy. So, I am like, this somehow became like my TED talk here. I apologize for this. So, but yeah, ownership is the wind beneath the GM and coach's wings. Yes, it is. It's the support. I remember hearing that I remember there was a thing in one of John Madden's books, and when I was growing up, I still read a lot, and in fact now I'm going back and rereading books from the past that I read. I'm currently rereading a history of the first 35 years of Atlantic Coast Conference men's basketball, a book that my parents gave me when I was 12. It's a huge book, a huge coffee table book, but it's very thorough. It's terrific. But I also I devoured all sorts of books. One of the books I remember reading was one that John Madden put together with Dave Anderson of the New York Times. And John Madden's books, like, there were a lot about like kind of his football philosophies. There was actually one that he talked a lot about like traveling and road trips and things like that. And he talked about being influenced by Travels with Charlie, by John Steinbeck, which led me to read Travels with Charlie, which led me to read more John Steinbeck work beyond what I was assigned in school. And that was something I did I read a lot of Steinbeck, like, in early adulthood, like, just on my own. But the thing that John Madden said was that the difference between good ownership and like bad ownership, and good management and bad management, is like a blocking sled. Like, if you're in a good organization, you ask for a blocking sled and you're going to get it. Like, no problem whatsoever. We'll get you that sled. If you work in a bad organization, you might not get the sled, or you might have somebody, a go-between between you and the owner, who will say, yeah, I'll get you that sled, no problem. Then they'll go to the owner and be like, oh, the coach says we need a sled, but he doesn't really need that. And then the owner will be cheap and not get it for you, right? That's like, if you have to go 10 rounds over the blocking sled, okay, that's bad. And I mean, there are other examples, but that's the sort of thing that in dysfunctional organizations, it's like you end up going 10 rounds over little things like that. The Broncos, one of the things that works so well about them with Pat Bowlen, even though Pat Bowlen was never the most cash-rich owner. I mean, there were other owners who had much more liquidity and cash than Pat Bowlen did. But when it came to the football, he would give Mike Shanahan what he needed. So Mike comes from 3 years with the San Francisco 49ers, and he's been on their staff. And the 49ers at that time were the gold standard under Eddie DeBartolo. Everything that Bill Walsh and then later George Seifert asked for, they got. It's like, okay, fine. We're going to be, we're going to fly in wide body planes. We're going to make sure all our players stay in their own rooms, which no one else did at the time. And so Mike comes back from San Francisco and tells Pat Bowlen, look, I want to make sure all my players stay in their own rooms on the road, as opposed to rooming with somebody else, which was the standard at the time. The reason being that in the regular season, like all these guys, like they have their own habits. Like, some guys want to stay up late and study the playbook the night before the game. Some guys want to sleep 10 hours. Like, and if they're in the same room together, they're not, sometimes they have different habits and whatnot. And maybe some guys want to just get on the phone and call their spouse back home. Maybe that settles them, right? And Pat Bowlen's like, okay, that's fine. If you believe it's going to help this team win football games and make it a better team, I'll do it. Little things like that. Like if the owner, a good owner will say, all right, coach, if you believe this is going to help us win, not be focused on the bottom line and what it's going to cost. If you believe it's going to help us win, because the real bottom line in sports is winning. Because the other thing is also, like, if you win, the other bottom line stuff's going to take care of itself over time. Especially in the NFL where, like, there's revenue sharing and ungodly amounts of money coming in from television and whatnot. I mean, shoot. Report, Pat Bowlen was ahead of his time. Yep. Wanted his organization to be number one in everything. Yep. Yep, he was. It was. You could start a Substack with long-form stories about your travels. Yeah, that would be something. I could probably write like about 100,000 words on my baseball trip of this past summer. Like when I went from Atlanta to DC to Strasburg, Virginia, by Strasburg Express right here. Valley League Summer Collegiate Woodbat Champions. They just won last week. To Reading, Pennsylvania, to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to Altoona, to State College, to Pittsburgh, and then on a plane and to Omaha for the College World Series. That was fun. That was a blast. Soothed my soul a little bit. So, Denver Football After Dark talking about dysfunctional teams. Oh, wow. You didn't have to do that, Rusty. You didn't have to do that, Roport, but man, thank you. I appreciate that. Really do. Thanks from the bottom of my heart. Like that, I've said before, I'll say it again. I'm not actively soliciting that sort of thing. But it does mean a lot if you see fit for that, for that, that's because I'm just doing this to put in reps, solo reps to get better as a broadcaster. So dysfunctional ownership, Raiders, Chargers, Cardinals. The Cardinals are a team that frequently finishes at the bottom of the NFLPA surveys. I mean, I think their cafeteria has received like negative reviews. Cowboys, the Texans are kind of an interesting one, especially there have been some weird stories about Cal McNair, for example, since he's inherited the team from Bob McNair, but at the same time, Cal seems to be kind of staying out of the way now, so I'm not sure where they fall in. Kind of to be determined. Miami does not seem to be terribly functional. I'm not sure we call them dysfunctional yet. But it's been a long time since they've won. They've not won a championship under Stephen Ross, and their last championship was 1973 with Joe Robbie. So it's been a minute. Atlanta's an interesting example. Remember, the thing with Atlanta is supposedly Bill Belichick didn't want to go there. Of course, I mean, we can have an entire show about Bill Belichick. We may have an entire show about Bill Belichick at some point because you might see the North Carolina pennant there for their national championships in basketball. So needless to say, I will be watching the Tar Heels with great interest. That may be a spectacular meltdown. Washington Broncos TV. Oh my goodness, Broncos TV. Yes. Roger Dry, my Tampa Bay Rays fan. I do have interest in the Rays, but by the time they started, I was really the Atlanta Braves were kind of it for me. And my first hometown was Richmond, Virginia, and I lived there till I was 11. And I've moved so many places since then. If people ask me like where I'm from, like where I tend to say Richmond. That's where it all started for me. So, and the Braves had their AAA affiliate in Richmond until 2008, from like 66 through '08. So, that's where my Braves fandom started, because we'd see them coming up through AAA, then they were on TBS, so you'd see them AAA, and then you'd see them on television. So that's kind of where my baseball fandom started. So that's why. Hope you had a good day out Dove Valley. Thanks for the later form. Pretty cool, great information. Appreciate you watching, Arvada Orange. Good to see you. Good to see all of you out here. Pat Bowen at Stories. Yeah, none of the owners are Saints, except the owners of the Saints, maybe. See, that's actually another thing when Sean Payton talks about the 20 dysfunctional. Some would say, well, the Saints are an interesting situation, but the Saints ownership, Gail Benson, and before her, Tom Benson, they always gave Sean Payton all he needed. And they won a championship, and the resources were always there. So from a football perspective, that would probably be an example of functional ownership. I mean, the Saints' problems aren't because they don't have resources. The Saints' problems are that they tend to keep putting everything on the credit card, and they just, for whatever reason, can't seem to swallow the pill that they need to swallow and just reset in the way they need to reset. Yeah. Ignacio Gomez. Tampa used to be dysfunctional. They seem to have it together now. They do. Like a big thing for them. You look back on it, was Jason Light as general manager, because that's their drafts started to really take a turn. And even though they missed on Jameis Winston over the long term, the talent started getting better and better and better. And so when Tom Brady walked in, it was a pretty good roster, and then they could add some more pieces around Tom, playoff Lenny, Gronk, etc. They got kind of the last pretty good season out of Ndamukong Suh, for example. But again, that's that ownership wherewithal to say, hey, let's go. We got a chance. Let's get all these guys. Let's get them in. We need them. Let's get them. So it's why, if the Broncos need to go get some reinforcements, if they feel like they're close this year, like if they're sitting there at 6-2 right before the trade deadline, and they feel like they need to get one more guy and to push them over the top, they'll go get one more guy. Watch. They will. Jags are extra dysfunctional. Yep. SSP Joel, do you know if anyone is writing a biography on Pat Bowlen? No, I do not know that anybody has one of those in the works. Don't know. I don't know that. I'm not sure there will be. I mean, Pat was pretty private on things, and especially since the sale, the family has been pretty private as well. Except when you occasionally see the occasional Johnny Bolin thing on Instagram, and usually when those are out, it's not good. So, anyway, I love Bella. You're making a Flex Lives reference. Oh gosh. Oh, anyway. The Bolin trust years were dysfunctional. Really makes you appreciate how things were before and currently with great ownership. Yeah, they do. It does. It really does. It really does. It's really interesting, though, how many teams we've discussed and how quick. Now, at first, when Sean Payton said 20, I think in my mind, I thought, oh, there's no way it's 20. But now you can kind of see, okay, I can kind of get there because you start going through functional situations and you say, okay, clearly functional. You start saying Eagles, Patriots, Ravens, Bucks, like just I think clearly functional. I think the Lions have become clearly functional. Packers, Broncos, Chiefs, Seahawks, Rams. 49ers are kind of borderline. Seahawks might be in an interesting situation. I think they were for a while, but it's kind of since Paul Allen's been gone, they've been okay, but they haven't reached the apex like they did when he was alive. Since then, the more I thought about it, the more, and we talked about the Steelers. I mean, I think the Steelers still are, but I know that you could say maybe it's a little bit in question. Buffalo is an interesting one too because they haven't quite gotten over the top. Certainly the Pagulas also own the Buffalo Sabres, and they're terrible in the NHL. I mean, there are reasons, but the Sabres have been irrelevant for a long time. The more I thought about it with Sean Payton, the more I started thinking, yeah, he may be onto something with this 20 number. Because at first I thought that was outlandish, and then as I considered it, and as we're discussing here, and you're kind of getting rough draft thoughts from me on this, but he might really be onto something with the 20. So, yeah, Seagulls, yeah, it's not, yeah. The Bears commander. The Commanders, I think, actually are becoming functional. For a while, they were the apex of dysfunction. I think now they are, but the McLaurin situation is sort of interesting right now. This is a team that you'd think if they really fancied themselves a contender that they would re-up with McLaurin, that they get this thing done. You've got a young quarterback who's cost control. Why wouldn't you make sure that you kept a reliable receiver like Terry McLaurin around? Like, that's a weird move to me. But then again, I will admit that I have been fond of Terry McLaurin since the pre-draft process in 2019. So I have a little bit of bias there. If you see a guy in college and then the pre-draft process, you watch him in college, you watch him in the Senior Bowl, all that, and you champion him, and he turns out to be a great player, then you sometimes you feel an attachment because you're like, okay, man, I knew that guy when, I interviewed that guy when, I championed that guy when, and so Terry McLaurin's one of those players that was because I was really pushing him and I wanted the Broncos to draft him. And so the fact that he worked out, I have this kind of weird thing, to this day, that he became a great player. And so I can't fathom the Commanders not wanting to have him around. The more I hear about that, I'm like, man, why we should do that. So anyway. Numerous rumors that Sean Payton was interested in the Chargers job prior to interviewing with the Broncos. There were rumors, and of course, he has the place out, by the Pacific Ocean out there. So, that was sort of the rumbling. The rumor was oh, of course he wants to coach out there and live in Southern California and all that. That was the case. But I think he's happy with how it worked out. I think he's happy with the organization. He's happy with this team. He's happy with his quarterback. He really, Bo's become an extension of him. I think that's like the really cool thing is seeing how quarterback has become like the mental extension of the coach. And now it actually is starting to become like the embryonic stages of like the Breeze Sean Payton thing. I mean, they say there are no second acts. We might be seeing a second act, at least in terms of that sort of thing. Yeah, Dan Snyder would spend the money just on the wrong players, like Albert Hainsworth. Like, yeah, Dan Snyder would win the offseason in terms of headlines every year. Like, if there were banners for off-season championships, Washington would have won it 10 years in a row. It was a 2-decade plus manual on how not to run an organization that Dan Snyder wrote. I think I wrote something when the Walton Penner Group bought the team, and I believe I wrote a line at the end of the story that says, if all else fails, just do the opposite of what Dan Snyder did, and you'll be fine. Like that, he provided a model of what not to do. I mean, at one point, charging people to go to training camp, which actually created something interesting because there was an NFL bylaw, like a little NFL bylaw at the time that said if you charged people to get into training camp, then any team could show up. Like, but if it was free, then you couldn't send like your scouts to watch training camp. But if you charged, then it was like a ticket to a game. Then it was like a game. So like if it's a game, teams can send their scouts to go sit in the press box and watch. So for example, when the Broncos have their preseason home game against Arizona, you'll probably see in the press box, there'll probably be a scout from the Titans there because they're going to see the Broncos in week 1. So when Washington had this training camp, I believe it was in 2000, they were charging fans to get in. Teams could have their scouts go and watch practice because the team was charging for it. So that didn't last very long. Like it was, George Costanza opposite. That was exactly what I was thinking. Like when they did that, like just do the opposite of what they did. So dysfunctional things make the season more entertaining. I, for one, am glad we have a very group of owners with their quirks and personalities. When the Jags implode, I'll be there. Yeah, I mean, you have to have some dysfunctional owners to make the ones that are good look good. But boy, I mean, you're lucky. I mean, the last owner before the Broncos to come into the league was David Tepper in Carolina. And he had been vetted. He owned a minority share of the Steelers. So people thought, okay, he'd been involved with the Steelers as a minority owner. They're going to be fine. He's wealthy. He's got an 11-figure net worth. So he's got the resources. He understands the NFL. This is going to work out wonderfully. And it's been a disaster out there in Charlotte. And that's what can happen. Like if you get the wrong owner, it can be a debacle. So, yeah, everyone was nervous about that. But boy, oh boy, did the Broncos hit a home run. I mean, all you have to do is look at how the team has come together. Look across the way at that complex they're building. Look at how dug in this ownership group is. Look at how they're out there so often and they're so engaged and they're watching, but they're not micromanaging. They're involved, but they're not meddling. In other words, they're kind of doing what Pat Bowlen did. I mean, just as you'd see Pat Bowlen watching practice, you see Greg Penner watching practice. That's what it reminds me of. I mean, how could you be so lucky to hit the lottery twice in a row with ownership? You had a Hall of Fame owner, and now you've got someone who's just appears to be the model owner of this era. I mean, just absolutely tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. And I think that studio cat puts it well. Penner's smart enough to hire people smarter than him. Yeah. Hire the best people and let them do their job. That's the thing. But they're accountable. Like, that's the thing. You let them do their job, but you make sure, you don't let them get away with everything. It's not like you make sure they're accountable to management, but you trust them to do their job. That's the thing. Broncos are in good hands. They are not one of the 20. They're dysfunctional at the top. And that's why they've got a shot to be a championship team. Now, that's the thing. Now, not all of those 12 have a shot to be a championship team because they don't all have the offensive line. They don't all have the defense. They don't have the quarterback. I mean, really, you can probably say, okay, who are those teams that have a real shot? You'd probably say, okay, the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Lions. Again, I think this generation of ownership in Detroit, you'd say, has that. William Clay Ford did not, but his heirs have figured it out. So you'd say Broncos, Chiefs, Lions, quite obviously the Eagles, the Packers. I mean, they don't have an owner, but their structure is exceptionally strong. I mean, there's a reason why the Packers barely dipped. They changed quarterbacks and they moved on from a Hall of Famer and they plugged in Jordan Love and they keep right on humming like that. The Packers are probably a great example of what Sean Payton is talking about as far as a team that is completely functional, an organization that's completely functional. Like that's what he's referring to. And the Broncos are that. I mean, the Packers they've had one really bad season. Like they were 4-12, I think, in 2005. They had one really bad season in the last 33. Like they've had the quarterbacks obviously for that time, but that's the thing he's talking about. That's what he means. So yeah, Broncos, Chiefs, Packers, Lions, Eagles. Who else would you think? Ravens. Maybe the Bills. I mean, it just depends what you think of the Pagulas, right? And running the team. And you'd say, even though they didn't, the Commanders, if Josh Harris, again, depends what you think of Josh Harris, maybe. But also by this standard, would you say Tampa Bay? It wouldn't. It doesn't. It's not ownership for Tampa Bay. It would depend on their defense. They've got the line. They've got the quarterback. They've got the ownership. They may not have the defense. That's the thing. So you got to have all four. So they may not have the D. So we start kind of eliminating teams. Like we can kind of. It's almost like we can kind of distill this down to like a handful of teams that can really win the Super Bowl, right? And the Broncos are one of them. So, but you could say like the Bucs maybe are a defense away. The Bills, the question maybe being at the top. But the Bills, I'd say the Bills are probably close enough to where you talk about them. But the Ravens definitely are in the mix. The Lions definitely are in the mix. The Eagles are definitely in the mix. The Chiefs are. The Broncos are. If the Bucks play good defense, I think they would be in the conversation that Sean Payton's talking about. I mean, and the Commanders, they got to figure this out with McLaurin. This is a strike against them that they're not figuring this out completely. It does not reflect well on them at the moment. And I would actually, if Cal McNair stays out of the way, because the Texans do have a lot of resources, no doubt. If Cal McNair stays out of the way and lets everybody do their jobs in Houston, then the Texans would be one of those organizations too. And the other wild card in this is the Colts, because we don't know about their ownership right now. It is passed now to a new generation of Ursays. Early indications are that these three women are very sharp and very much have put the feet to the fire for Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard. Chris Ballard has done a very good job of building the roster, except for the one big thing. You could say the Colts have the defense and the Colts have the offensive line, but they do not have the quarterback. Ownership, we're learning about them. I think they'll do well. But if the Colts are a quarterback away. But a few of us were talking about this at the start of practice. Broncos practice just before they got going into into 1-on-1s and 7-on-7s, that if the Colts had a quarterback, you'd be talking about them as a contender, but they don't. But the quarterback situation is such a mess; it just ruins everything. But remember, they were a Jonathan Taylor drop of the ball from potentially being a playoff team. And then the year before with Gardner Minshew, they were one game away. That's like the weird thing about the Colts. It's a good roster except for one position, and it's the most important thing. So, but the Colts are a fascinating team, because like you would say, you would say potentially they are going to be one of those functional teams. I think every sign is that they are going to be a very functional team at the top, with the three daughters of Jim Irsay running the show. So that is something to watch if they can ever figure out quarterback. Because again, we've seen it with Jim Irsay when he was in his times when he was doing well and not struggling with his addictions. The organization did very well, and they were one of those teams that did not have dysfunction at the top, and they were successful. So, I had a lot to say on this. This was on my mind all day. So thank you for bearing with me and confirming that the Broncos might be kind of in an elite class of like 6 or 7 that really, truly have a shot at the championship, have a shot at winning it all. I feel better about the Broncos being a Super Bowl team now than I did when this started, because I've been able to eliminate some other teams in my mind just because of what Sean Payton said. And before we go, one thing, Hard Knocks kicks off tomorrow. Do we want a Broncos version of Hard Knocks? Personally, I can live without it, but at some point it's going to happen now that the league is going to basically start compelling teams to do it. Sean Payton on Hard Knocks would be fascinating. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Denver football after dark for this Monday night and Tuesday morning. Appreciate you riding with me for a little over an hour talking about which teams are dysfunctional at the top. I think we got to pretty much everybody in this discussion. Appreciate you joining me tonight. We will talk more about the Broncos on Tuesday night before I toddle off to the San Francisco Bay Area to go cover the Broncos joint practice with the San Francisco 49ers. So thanks for joining me here on this Monday night and a Tuesday morning. Appreciate all of you riding with me on this show, this program, this little test kitchen I've got here on YouTube. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Thanks for, and tell your friends about this if you enjoy this. Appreciate y'all, and I will talk to you next time. Take care. Thanks for watching.